a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
Hello and welcome to episode 116 of the Daily Australian for Friday, June the 20th, 2025. I am dressed by my sponsor, Rodney Dangerfield, in my golfing suit from 1984. Well, something like that anyway, but welcome to the show, Nicola Charles. It's going to be a monster edition today.
I'm dressed by my sponsor, some random charity shop I was in 2017. So today, as you said, Jason, is the 20th of June. Why is that an important date? Well, somebody sent me a clip yesterday that there was an episode of The Simpsons, and we all know that Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, is a Freemason. And in it, there's a book that's opened, and it says June the 20th, and it's the end of the world. So we're okay because we're in Australia. So this will happen on the 21st for us, I'm reasonably sure. So we'll see if we get to the weekend, Jason. Fingers crossed.
Well, I got one more karaoke show to get away with tonight, so maybe I'll sing at the end of the world or something like that. Actually, what I was planning to do was sing Live It Up by Mental as Anything. So everyone stay away when I do that one. You've been warned. But I did practice it last week, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. So we'll have a bit of fun doing that later this evening. But look, there's a lot to get through today. And hello to everyone, and thank you so much for those that have taken advantage of our 20% off annual plan to join us on Substack. As you know, we started doing this in January, and 116 represents the number of shows. Each show has its own number. So we put away 100 episodes before we even considered about, making a sort of a subscriber situation there on Substack, which is a wonderful website that effectively becomes like your own website, and you can do so many things on it. You can post videos, audio, written articles, etc., and the ability to be able to set up a subscription. So one of the things that we've done is that we didn't promise any extra material in the first instance because we're already producing this show every day, and it takes a good 4 or 5 hours of work from each of us to put it together. So there's a fair bit of work. But having said that, for paid subscribers, we will plan to add extra value in terms of videos and some written articles as well. So I do want to encourage you at this stage. It is purely doing it on blind faith, but we worked out that on some 240 editions per annum, based on what we've done so far, it's not quite June 30, we're already up to 116, that it works out actually around at that $60, it works out about 25 cents a day. So when it returns to 75, it might be 30 cents a day or something like that. So I can't thank you enough for the many people that have taken advantage of it, and it does mean that we don't have to go out and do other work to be able to put food on the table at home, but to be able to work here. And it's not like we're getting rich off what we're doing. We are just doing it to sustain ourselves. We don't want to become anything that our audience is not either. We're just good, hardworking people representing a niche in the market that is not provided for. And I'll tell you what, we seem to be getting a lot more right than wrong, despite what the haters want to come at us with, Nicola.
Yeah, it was all sort of based on trust, really. We trusted that we'd do the show, build it and they will come, Field of Dreams. And it's funny, isn't it, working on trust? Because I always thought that was interesting, when people set up trusts for their children and trusts for their future. It's actually the opposite of trust. The reason that you set up a trust is because you don't trust the kids. So you appoint someone to make the decision to say, no, you can't buy that dangerous fast sports car. You can't buy that expensive house. It has to be approved by the trust. So we did do this based on trust, and so we're really grateful that you're following us. Now, just before we came to air, Jason, I saw a brilliant rant by Judicial Watch in America, the official Judicial Watch, and they are jumping around, super excited. They've got 552 pages from a Freedom of Information request, which proves that during his tenure, Anthony Fauci with the NIH the NIH were absolutely engaged in, completely confirmed, gain-of-function research to develop what it says in these documents are mutant human diseases. Why on earth would they want to do that, Jason? It's extraordinary. So congratulations to Judicial Watch, and they're going to start sharing the pages. So it looks like the information is finally coming out.
Yeah, it's fabulous, isn't it? Because yesterday on the show, we showed you the John Solomon story that also involves Mike Benz in terms of the Chinese ballots. And so they now have got real evidence now showing interference in the 2020 election, the stuff that we're all called conspiracy theorists, which was censored, etc. People were absolutely punished for such a result. And of course, this is what January 6th was all about. So parking that for a moment, it may be worth to jump a little bit ahead here because I want to present to you another video that I was going to say for a little bit later. But this goes to, it's just appeared in the US Congress. This is to do with the auto pen. And now if you consider that Joe Biden had an auto pen or someone else pulling the strings, it's highly possible that the entire Trump administration will take on the Biden so-called administration, and most of which will be annulled. Take a look.
When the president signs, he communicates his assent and endorsement of the action he takes. The auto pen is a device that signs the president's signature to a document. The oversight project, of which I am a board member, has discovered that the Biden White House deployed an auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to pardons, prison commutations, executive orders, and presidential proclamations. The Oversight Project's research has found that the Biden White House first deployed the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to a proclamation on day 5 of his administration, and that there were at least 3 different auto pen signatures in use throughout President Biden's tenure in the White House. In June 2022, the Biden White House began deploying the auto pen to sign clemency warrants and executive orders. Auto pen use skyrocketed from there. We found that of the 51 clemency warrants issued during the Biden presidency, over half, 32 in total, were signed with an auto pen. And these include some of the most controversial acts of clemency of the Biden presidency, including death row commutations and the preemptive pardons of members of the Biden family, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and more that were issued in the final days of the Biden presidency. We reviewed President Biden's schedule and his publicly available media and were unable to find any record of President Biden's personally approving these actions, such as a statement issued by the president himself to reporters. In addition, we found that the Biden White House used the auto pen to affix President Biden's signature to clemency warrants and executive orders while the president himself was in Washington, D.C. for at least some of that day and thus was presumably available to sign important executive actions. Finally, we found multiple days where President Biden wet-signed a bill into law but used an auto pen to issue an executive order or for other important executive actions. The Biden White House's widespread use of an auto pen to affix President Biden's signatures to documents that exercise executive powers belonging solely to the president poses significant constitutional, legal, and practical considerations. Once the president's signature is copied and loaded into the auto pen, the machine can sign documents as the president himself would. To be blunt, by using the auto pen, anyone can sign documents as the president himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not here today to suggest that the auto pen is bad. It's just technology. I'm here today because of questions concerning President Biden's capacity and whether the auto pen was used to usurp presidential power or to conceal the president's decline. As the sitting president's mental acuity declined, potentially to the point of incapacitation, his administration's expansion of the powers of the presidency raises more questions than answers. Any investigation into this matter should focus not only on whether President Biden directed or authorized subordinate staff to take action in certain instances, but whether he had the capacity to do so at all. The 25th Amendment lays out clear procedures for what to do when the president is incapacitated. It was carefully drafted and informed by our nation's history. The Biden administration ignored it all to aggrandize executive power and push the country further in their preferred ideological direction. It is our obligation at this point to get to the bottom of these issues and to ask the important question as to whether or not the auto pen and other devices were used to cover and obscure President Biden's mental decline, undermining our national security and also the Constitution.
Why aren't smart Americans, right? Why aren't smart Americans alarmed by what's gone on here in the Biden administration? Somebody sent me something this morning and I had to research it because I just didn't actually believe it when I saw it as a fan. That the comedian who's worth 400 million, Larry David, wrote a piece for the New York Times. And he's saying it was satire now because people are going crazy about it, where he basically said that Trump was Adolf Hitler. And he was talking about another comedian that went and had an audience with Trump. And it's just
Bill Maher.
extraordinary to me. Yeah. How can you sit on that much money and be so detached from the people who put you there? You know, the everyday Americans that thought you were funny, you know, the everyday Americans and Australians that were told are anti-Semitic, and yet they, you know, ate up everything that you ever wrote because they thought you were a really funny dude. And then you come out and do something like that. It's subtle, it's clever. So he's a clever guy, but it's pretty disgusting.
You know, Bill Maher made some comments about his visit to Trump, which Kid Rock invited him to go see. And he said there was an expectation of the way that Trump would behave, etc. And he was totally open. You could ask him anything. He gave you responses to it all. And he said, I was thoroughly, to paraphrase, I was thoroughly impressed by Trump, to which Bill Maher took a serve from his supporters. And this is the point, that politics has become such hate-filled that it's a team. It's like, yeah, it's a tribal. Well, it's no different to here. I mean, but the left defending their term in office, and they have total power around the country, behave in such a way that you've never seen before. This almost entitlement. We're in power and that's it. And it just builds and builds and builds until the pendulum again swings the other way. But the difference, of course, is
I saw a Democrat pundit on CNN, and she was saying, you know, you can't do that. You can't behave that way, right? You can't be that irresponsible. She said, because what you're doing, what you're saying then, she said, this is why the Democrats will never get back in power, is what she was saying. Because you're essentially saying that those 80 plus million people who did vote for him to be the commander in chief are all Nazis. Surely if he's Adolf Hitler, they're all Nazis, right? So, you know, she said, this is how we on the left alienate the majority of voters. And I think she was right about that. Talking about politicians being out of touch. If you got that clip from Western Australia, Jason, it's a very short clip where it was in the Western Australian Parliament and some questions had been asked on notice. So they had to give the answers about how many Western Australian children had been jabbed for COVID-19. And that it's now, but we've now been told it's unsafe for children to take. Why is that? And the response that comes is shocking, because why? Because these complete brainwashed shills are now saying that these vaccines are still safe. Now, what you just showed there was that there are 652,000, I think, under 18s in Western Australia. Have a listen to how many got the jab.
The Honourable Rod Caddies.
Thank you, President. My question, without notice of which some notice is given, is to the Leader of the House representing the Minister for Preventative Health. I refer to the COVID-19 vaccination of Western Australia children, and I ask, 1. How many West Australians aged 18 years and younger received a COVID-19 vaccination between the 1st of October 21 and the 30th of June 2023? 2. Can the Minister confirm that COVID-19 vaccines were initially deemed to be safe and effective for all children and that they are now no longer recommended as the risks outweigh the benefits? 3. Can the Minister outline what risks of COVID-19 vaccination for people under 18 years of age are known to the WA Health Department? And 4. Is the WA Department of Health conducting ongoing surveillance of possible long-term impacts of COVID-19 vaccines on West Australians who received them as children?
Leader of the House.
Thanks, President, and I thank the honourable member for some knowledge of the question. I'll provide this answer on behalf of the Minister for Preventative Health. 1, 235,877. 2 to 4, immunisations, including the COVID-19 vaccine, are a safe and effective preventative health measure to help reduce the spread and seriousness of certain diseases. Recommendations in the Australian Immunisation Handbook were updated based on evidence collected over the course of the pandemic. The Department of Health continues to monitor COVID-19 vaccines.
Okay, so they told us during that pandemic that over 90, I think at one point they said 95% of adults and children had received that COVID-19 vaccine. I am celebrating today, Jason, that we now learn that out of 652,890 under 18s in WA, only 235,877 took it. That's too many. That's a third. That's too many. But it's not the above 90% that the federal government told us.
Very true. And that's 400,000 kids that are not touched there. Look, watching that there, it said question without notice. That can't possibly be true. This fellow had the answer written on a piece of paper that he read out immediately with that exact number of 230,877 kids who were jabbed. So that was staged at the same point. But then he didn't really address the answer in terms about the risks that were still involved. He didn't really want to mention that. And then he kind of said, we'll look, what about surveillance ongoing? And he sort of brushed that one off as well. It's just one of those things, isn't it? This is when you catch government in a lie and how they deflect using all the power and resources in their favour. So to stay in Australia for the moment, I'm going to put this one up. This is one for you, Nicola. That's what Coatsworth said, but this is what you said. Look at that. Nick Coatsworth, amidst all the discussion about increasing taxes in Australia to repair an unsustainable budget, there isn't a single word from the Albanese government about reining in spending or spending our money more effectively and efficiently. Not a single word. There you go. Well, it's extraordinary. What I want to do now is actually let's stay on Australian news. I'm going to give you another one here. This is Senator Rennick, who is in his final days as an elected senator before he becomes a commoner like the rest of us. He put this up on his page yesterday on Facebook. Senator Rennick, this is my last question, Chair. I note Westpac last week have now offshored another 160 jobs to the Philippines. I know we recently signed a free trade agreement with India. Do we know how much money in remittances is getting sent offshore in terms of wages paid either for outsourcing or people coming onshore? For example, I've been told that there are people coming from the Philippines to build the transmission lines between Wagga and South Australia. Is that something that Treasury tracks in terms of how much in remittances is going offshore into each country? And if so, how much withholding tax is being withheld on those payments? Mr. Tinning will take that one on notice. It's not hard to see why Treasury took my question about the free trade agreements with the Philippines and India on notice. It turns out that the Australian government charges no taxes on wages paid by Australian companies to foreign workers in other countries who are effectively working remotely, taking Australian jobs. Not only are we losing jobs, we're losing the tax that those jobs would have paid, while Australian corporations still get a tax deduction despite sending money offshore. This means the remaining Australian workers have to pay higher taxes to make up the shortfall. This is selling Australia out, plain and simple. Furthermore, for those of you who think that working at home is a good thing, be careful what you wish for. You might be replaced by a foreign worker. People First, he says, is the only party who actually take this as a policy to stop this betrayal of the Australian workers by lifting withholding taxes on profits sent offshore. And the letter he got back here from Senate estimates. The question, what's the withholding tax on remittances paid to India and the Philippines for services that have been offshored by big Australian companies? The answer, Australia does not impose non-resident withholding tax on services. Then the next question, what is the total amount of remittances paid offshore to the Philippines and India in absolute dollar terms? Well, the ATO does not even collect this information. Where relevant to Australian tax liabilities, the ATO works with other agencies such as AUSTRAC to collect relevant information on the cross-border cash flows. In other words, the policy is we don't care where the Australian government will import what we can and will send things offshore. And this is technically, one way or another, a government Ponzi scheme to stay in power. They don't care. They don't have the answers, and people want to tell me that the guy that's trying to make America great's the bad guy and the Nazi. It's just unbelievable that we just are so brainwashed to consider that we have been sold out by idiot politicians with lunatic bureaucrats. And hello to the guys that are hassling us on our pages. Clearly sock puppets working for government or for spy agencies. Guys, lift your game, mate. We are just making Australia better, and you guys are white-anting us for the reasons we can't be sure It must be worth it to get a few extra dollars in your pocket to live your own life out. What a pathetic existence these government bureaucrats are, especially the spies that just try and get in there and destroy us. Amazing. This is the Daily Australian, and we will continue to fight for you.
They have all those 0 follower accounts and they just keep coming back, don't they? It's like whack-a-mole. You whack one down and another one turns up. So what Senator Rennick was highlighting there essentially is an Australia last policy.
Yes.
That's what the federal Labor government and state by state are doing. And the reason is I've always wanted to set up an online school, an online education system. Now, let's say I didn't want to pay tax in Australia. If I set up an online education school and all of the educators online like this on a Teams call or a Zoom call were in India or the UK or America or Germany or South Africa, I wouldn't have to pay tax in Australia. So what you're doing is you're encouraging businesses to use and employ people overseas, which is 2 fingers to you, Australia. That's what your government's doing. Did you vote for that? I don't think you did. And what does someone like Albo, the supposed PM, do? I'll give you $275 off your massively inflated electricity bill. Well, no one's received that I know, and we certainly haven't received it. Or $5 off your taxation. Can you not see that they are going round the back and shafting you royally from behind while dangling a little carrot at the front that never even eventuates? So we're in real trouble here in Australia. Excuse me. And for those reasons, I'm not surprised that Trump wasn't super keen on hanging around at the G7 to meet Anthony Albanese. I don't think he sees him as relevant. I think he sees him as a sellout. And someone also contacted me who was at the G7 as media and said that there was a rumor going around the G7 that Giorgia Meloni of Italy had said that she did not want Anthony Albanese at the dinner in the evening. I don't know if that was true. That was just a G7 rumor, but I don't know if he attended. I think if he had attended, we would have seen photographs. So maybe she got her wish. You know, she's quite powerful in Europe. So interesting politically. The world is kind of separating. Excuse me, getting over my flu. I think Anthony Albanese and Dan Andrews have definitely gone down the China road. And, you know, we always say, oh, my God, you know, they're trying to drag Australia into communism and a dictatorship. I think we're already there. Aren't we already there if that kind of thing is happening, Jason?
Oh, look, we most certainly are snookered or pigeonholed into a region that we're going to have to need fundamental structural change to be able to get out of where we are. And I think it's beyond the election at the moment, but it is certainly shaping in the background here with the moves of the Nationals and the Libs to move away at least from net zero. So that there's a break now in the political system. So it's not this mono globalist plan. There is some sort of change. Look, shortly I want to, I'm going to go to an article that Rod Martin wrote, a brilliant analyst and CEO from the US, on China and Iran. And I think it's very important to compare to what you just said. But what I was hoping to do was just to sort of stay with the local news for the moment and just conclude that. And then because we're going to go and touch on Iran and what's going on in the Middle East shortly. But perhaps what we could do now, just for the fun of it, is a little bit, it's a bit satirical, but it's also very real, and I think it's very apt. This is a short clip. Take a look at this.
I'm digging this up to sell it to China for cheap, then I'll buy it back as steel at triple the price. Bloody genius, right?
Righto. $10 a kilo for China and 100 for Aussies, because why the hell not?
You beauty. More cheap oil for China. Shame it still costs $3 for us locals, eh?
I'd love to educate our Aussie youth, but the Chinese students are just paying more. Sorry, folks, we got to send the Aussies somewhere else. Another 100,000 migrants land this week.
Righto, that's another section done. Toll set, and, well, the new owners seem happy.
Yes, and who are the new owners of all the toll roads? Australians are literally paying China to drive on Australian roads. Meanwhile, we're still paying our rego and we're still paying our licensing fees. Australia has basically been sold off in a flash sale And we've been sold off primarily to China, and it's very sad. Now, I would like to address, someone contacted the show. We always say we're staying Australian for a second. Someone contacted me. He's an electrician, fair enough. And he said to me, you talked about phased array antenna. You don't know anything about phased array antenna and 5G and all that stuff. And it's normal and it's been around for years. Yes, it has. It's been around for years as a weapon. Now, I have been researching 5G for 7 or 8 years since I was on regular radio. And when I started talking about 5G properly, the research or lack of it behind it, I remember a producer on that regular radio knocking on the glass, looking at me while I was live on radio and going, "You sound crazy." And but all of the research that I was presenting was totally valid, but it was so out there that people didn't want to believe it. So I wanted to play a section for you today. It's actually heartbreaking because you're going to see an old guy from the military who talks about how this stuff was used as weapons. From the movie, The 5G Extinction Event by Sacha Stone, amazing filmmaker. And it's just a short clip, and I suggest you go and find the full movie. 90 minutes long, absolutely extraordinary. And Mark Steele is part of this movie, and he's a head-up weapons display expert from the UK who's been pushing back against 5G for the last decade. Let's have a look at what we think is phone connectivity, but actually came from somewhere completely different.
You must consider the whole part played by electricity in nature. Human beings cannot go on developing in the same way in an atmosphere permeated on all sides by electric currents and radiations. It has an influence on the whole development of man. This life of men in the midst of electricity, notably radiant electricity, will presently affect them in such a way that they will no longer be able to understand the news which they receive so rapidly. The effect is to damp down their intelligence. Such effects are already seen today. Even today, you can notice how people understand the things that come to them with far greater difficulty than they did a few decades ago. Rudolf Steiner, 1924. Rudolf Steiner noted that in 1924, since then our atmosphere has become far more permeated with electric waves of widely diverse types. There's no doubt now that electric waves, electromagnetic forces, cause direct biological effects. There's thousands of peer-reviewed papers on this subject. There's no doubt about it. But what are these effects? How are they affecting us? What can we do about it? We're now at a stage where we're putting in what's called 5G, which is a special type of broadcast for high-density information transfers. And it turns out that this is the same frequency bands that are used in crowd dispersal weaponry.
.5G, first and foremost, is densification. So it's significantly more transmitters in close proximity to a human, and it is also a sophisticated, illegal, unlawful transmitter. What I mean by that is it is a high-gain dielectric lens antenna, and what that allows 5G transmitters to do is to 3D map its environment in your home. The 868 megahertz frequency is specific for battlefield interrogation systems, so sub-gigahertz. It allows the signal to travel through concrete brickwork with ease, and it can actually data gather. It is a target acquiring system. Phased array is basically radar off the battlefield. It is extremely good at identifying targets and being able to lock onto targets. And not only that, it can specifically target you as an individual. So any judge sitting on an interesting case, let's say, any lawyer, any barrister, anybody doing any work that is potentially controversial, your life could be at threat. So the antenna design that you currently have on top of these LED streetlights, masquerading as a control management system, It basically battlefield interrogation equipment. The first phased array unit was actually called Mammoth, used by the Germans during the Second World War to identify Allied aircraft. Obviously things have moved on significantly since then.
Well, I joined the Royal Navy in 1960, and I specialised in microwave warfare. Radar, obviously, which uses microwave, but they don't just teach you radar, they teach you all about microwaves and other uses. So I understood about microwave warfare and how it can damage people, how it can harm people. Microwaves then were used as weapons, as they are today. It is a perfect stealth weapon, and when governments don't like a group of people, for instance, the ladies who protest at Greenham Common in England about the American missile base they camped, they were microwaved. We microwaved Catholics in Northern Ireland to make them sick. It goes on all over the world, and it's a weapon that you don't know you're being targeted, because the dose is very, very low, which is actually more dangerous than a high dose. It's very, very low, and it may take a year or two, but you can cause neurological damage and cancers with low-level microwaves, and you can make all your opponents sick. It's a perfect weapon for a government.
So we're existing in the perfect stealth weapon for governments, which is radar from the battlefield, which is 5G. We hold it in our hands with our smartphones. And what this stuff causes is, if you just go into Google anytime after the show, not during the show, and look up Havana syndrome. You know, Havana syndrome was first noted at the American embassy in Havana in Cuba, where they tested this stuff on their own embassy officials. And there are stories of these guys taking the US government to court because it's now caused, you know, irreparable brain damage, brain fog, illness, and changed them forever. So when I talk about phased array antenna, which is used for Starlink, that's a fact. So all of the Starlink satellites, and I know he's trying to help people in Iran connect, and my friends in Iran did manage to speak to their family members for a whopping 7 seconds. They were allowed to connect on a satellite phone to say we're alive. So they're happy in Australia. They got that news. But these Starlinks use phased array. Every 5G antenna uses phased array. There's even phased array in these smartphones, right? So, you know, you need to understand, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't there. So with regard to everyone, look at me, in Melbourne getting sick at the same time, not catching it virally, but all sick at the same time, a low-level microwave radiation can do that. And I think it's important for people to realize, because there are plenty of things that are real that you can't see. Electricity is real, but you can't see it. Radiation is real, but you can't see it. So come at me all you want about 5G and phased array antenna, but I've been looking at this for a very long time. I suggest you go and watch that movie called 5G, The Extinction Level Event by Sacha Stone. There are some Senate hearings in there, and it will be a complete eye-opener for you.
Well said. Well, continuing now with our coverage from Australia, I want to play you a clip now. This is to do with the Caravan Dural affair, where the so-called explosives were found some time ago, and it was considered to be an anti-Semitic attack, but the dates didn't line up, and so it got lost. So meanwhile, John Ruddock in the upper house of the New South Wales State Parliament, alongside Mark Latham and Rod Roberts, who are both now independents formerly of One Nation, have asked for an inquiry. Now, the audio in this is not particularly good because it was taken in the street, but this is the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, and his behaviour. Now, this is one of these situations that we talked about earlier when politicians are on the back foot, and it's important just to see how he reacts to this, and then he tries to make his argument towards the end. Take a look.
Look, I think that there's a lot of games being played by the Legislative Council, and I said this previously. ultimately, we've got a job to do on behalf of the people of New South Wales. They do too, but I don't think it involves having these elaborate public hearings where they, on a routine basis, try and get New South Wales government staff to appear almost like they're criminals and they're under investigation, or they should front some kind of Star Chamber inquiry, and if not, they're under threat of arrest.
So what's the issue?
I honestly think that it may be some kind of an attempt to say to young people, well, maybe you shouldn't think about a career in the New South Wales government because you could be liable to one of these inquiries.
Labor didn't seem to have these concerns. Labor didn't have this concern in
One of my
opposition.
staff, for example,
When Sarah Lau appeared
I think you're going to want to hear this, and I'm not running away.
Sure,
I'm going to take as many questions as you want.
I've got a few.
But I think it's reasonable for me to finish my answer. One of the staff that's been asked to give evidence was on his honeymoon during this alleged period, and this is all based on some kind of conspiracy theory that no one's ever elaborated on, that the New South Wales government has deliberately misled members of the Legislative Council. I just want to draw you back to the day that we spoke about the Dural Caravan criminal investigation. That wasn't because we decided to go public with that investigation. It was because it was on the front page or the first page of the Daily Telegraph website. Good journalism on behalf of the Telegraph. It forced us to respond. We were specifically criticised for that at the time. Wind forward 6 months. Now, apparently, on the date that we spoke about the Dural Caravan investigation, it was an alarming plot by me to frighten the people of New South Wales. Now, you can't say both things are right. It was either the wrong decision in the first instance, or we were trying to scare the people of New South Wales. No one from the upper house has been able to square that circle, and this is just an attempt to prolong some kind of conspiracy theory.
Oh my God, it's all just a conspiracy theory, Jason.
It's the common answer, isn't it? So when you don't know how to answer it, you call it a conspiracy theory, and then, of course, everyone puts the shutters down and goes, oh, here we go again, the crazies. The ones that got it wrong about the jabs that just got shown in the WA Parliament, they're questioned and they still deny it. The same people that we talk about jobs offshore, the same when you talk about immigration causing housing prices to go up. The government literally says, oh, no, it's not immigration that's causing the price of housing to go up. Like, who's the conspiracy theorist here? And the next thing we'll have the E-Safety Commissioner coming out and going to do another round of censoring on behalf of the government that they work for, that she works for there. It's just extraordinary. But
I can
Chris
tell you
means...
what they are. They're Machiavellian, right? So it's all theatre. So what they do is essentially they're setting the fire at the back of the house, and then they're running around the front of the house and they're trying to sell you a fire hose. So they're in control of all of it, right? And then when they get called out, when things don't make sense, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, we're just theorizing on your giant conspiracy, your Machiavellian piece of theatre, and we require that you explain yourself.
Yeah. Machiavellian, do whatever it takes. That was the argument that Graham Richardson, former Labor minister, used to say, that he was a Machiavellian. Do whatever it takes. That was the word of the day. And it seems that this is the same way that they behave on and on again. Now, as we are halfway through the show today, or give or take, we'll see how we go in terms of timing for you. I'll just bring up this as a quick message. If you want to take part and become a subscriber to the Daily Australian, you can get 20% off an annual plan. Our best seller, the annual plan, was $75 for the year, and we've reduced it to just $60 to make a contribution. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, we will start to add exclusive content for our paid subscribers, on top of the fact that we provide as many as 240 shows in the year, working out to about 25 cents each. So if you would like to support independent media, we are eternally grateful for that. And this show is about you, and you can become one of the Daily Australians to support the show here. There you go.
Well, you wouldn't get any other newsreaders in Australia, A, telling the truth, and B, working for less than minimum wage, because that's essentially what we're doing. So you're welcome. And the reason is we want to do right by you, Australia. You know, it's for us, it's for our kids, for future grandkids, and for you. Because, you know, I'm so old, I remember Australia, such a long time ago, 5 years ago. And this was a great country, and they've deliberately destroyed it. So we're going to keep calling them out and keep holding their feet to the fire. So if you'd like to support us in that endeavour, and I think you should, then jump onto Substack and subscribe. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Now, I think it's time to get into the big story of the day, of course, and that would be to talk about what's happening in the Middle East. Yesterday on the show, I mentioned that on the Today Show, Colonel Doug McGregor was on and Sarah Arbo was asking questions, and McGregor was pretty much saying that Trump had committed to send troops or send US intervention into the Middle East. And I said that that was not exactly right. I thought the opposite held, and there's no way Doug McGregor would give up Donald Trump on Channel 9. Well, the Wall Street Journal then went on to say the same plans, and then Jesse Waters on Fox News went to include that in his 10-minute opening monologue to say that the Wall Street Journal had proposed that Trump had made a decision. Well, Donald Trump responded, and here it is. Donald Trump, the Wall Street Journal has no idea, in capital letters, what my thoughts are concerning Iran. So there you go. So I just want to make that point here.
That's
Now,
what they
I
do,
want
the mainstream media. They sell it as fact. And that's why they're opposed to opinion as well. Because in opinion, we're not saying, oh, we're telling you this is exactly factual. We're saying, okay, this is what they've said, so let's discuss it. But they sell it as absolute fact, as, you know, it's a 10th commandment. This is how Trump feels. And so, you know, Trump's brave enough to go, actually, I didn't say that.
Yep, the man who called him out for fake news, and that's where the fact checkers came from, thanks to Hillary Clinton. But on that, what I might do now is I'm going to take you now to Karoline Leavitt, who is obviously the press secretary for the Trump administration, and here she is addressing the press in two parts to this clip. The first one's a little bit blurrier than expected, but it explains exactly what's going on here. We're talking about Trump's actual decision making and the reasons why and what he actually expects from Iran. Here we go.
Regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today. So the president is always interested in a diplomatic solution to the problems and the global conflicts in this world. Again, he is a peacemaker in chief. He is the peace through strength president. And so if there's a chance for diplomacy, the president's always going to grab it. But he's not afraid to use strength as well, I will add. Francesca.
Thanks, Caroline. What exactly would a deal with Iran need to entail?
No enrichment of a uranium, and it would absolutely not. Iran is not absolutely not able to achieve a nuclear weapon. The president has been very clear about that. And by the way, the deal that Special Envoy Witkoff proposed to the Iranians was both realistic and acceptable within its terms, and that's why the president is sent that deal to them.
I wonder who it was that hacked Iranian TV last night and basically encouraged the people to rise up. By the way, that sort of connected the Trump thing with the 5G message that we were talking about. Because Trump, if you remember, said Huawei couldn't go into America because he knew the dangers of this kind of equipment and the effect it could have on people. So that's interesting to know. But yeah, the TV was hacked and it essentially told people to rise up, which I fear they might be a bit too afraid to do. But do we know who did that, Jason? Was that Israel or was that America? We don't know.
Yeah, look, I can't answer that question, but what I can show you is something from the taboo letter, the 17th letter of the alphabet. And this is what they call a delta. This is something that happens on an anniversary. So this is a post from 7 years ago. So June 19th, 2018. Take a look. It says, June 19, 2018, free Iran, fight, 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 regime change, people have the power, we stand with you. How do you get that one right to the day if we're not watching a movie or something else? Now, just as a complete aside, and let me just go and have my little bit of an out there moment. You know how serendipity, things that just land in your lap, and I'm finding that it happens more and more. So I'm scrolling through the feed last night and I see a video clip from a South Korean, I assume, scientist who supposedly has an IQ of 267. And he's talking about the difference between what happens to the soul after you die. And he explains it in terms of quantum mechanics. And in so doing, he explains that there's these different levels, etc., and that was sort of mixing with something else. But the idea was that that there's obviously more to what happens after you pass. Not like the old thing is you're a computer, you die, that's it, you don't know, and that's the end of you. But this is that it continues on. And so then I combine it with another video that I just happened to see and it explains that you go on to different levels and you see a different understanding, etc. And then it talks about that some people want to come back and go through the process again, which we've all heard of before, and others advance and end up in different forms. When you see something like this, that post just then, you know that we're seeing something that we cannot possibly explain. And so those that believe it or accept it go, well, it's beyond me, it's bigger than me. And as such, like a religion, I kind of want to believe in it because it's supporting, not my bias, but it's supporting itself. It's one of the things that it used to say was future proofs past. Well, talk about the future-proving past right there. It literally predicted on June 19 that regime change. We saw video clips yesterday coming out of Iran of people exiting, mass exodus. We've seen some video clips alluding to the fact that people are wanting regime change over there in Iran. And what's actually holding here is that Trump's saying he's going to make a decision in 2 weeks. He's giving the Iranian people the chance to demand regime change. So he's getting their own people to snooker and corner the Ayatollah, who is getting more and more isolated every day, to say, we don't want you. Now, we've learnt that he's underground, the Ayatollah somewhere, some sort of hiding. There's various different scenarios of missiles.
Trump said he knows where he is.
Knows where he is, but we've also seen some information saying that they've been using a particular weapon. I'll get it for you in a second. I'm just going to find the clip for you.
Can I just say as well, I was contacted by one of my geopolitical people, and he said that it was the CIA that installed that Ayatollah, that they controlled him, and that he behaved for a while, and now he's not behaving anymore, which would explain why Barack Obama would give him $3 billion in cash in wooden crates, because that was during a time that he was behaving. So apparently he always was an asset, but now he's a power tripper. It's all gone to his head and he's not doing as he's told anymore. So it's time for him to get out, which is also Machiavellian, right? It's a bit worrying if that was true.
Well, absolutely, because the next thing is, what is his end game if he is cornered? And this is why I made that suggestion yesterday, that no one sort of argued with me on the whole Wailing Wall thing. But if this man is snookered and he gets to be the last suicide bomber, what's he going to shoot at? Like, what would you take out? You know what I mean? Like, if this is where
Zelensky
it is, if he's
went like that. Imagine if Zelensky went like that. That's what I'm saying, right? Because they obviously own Zelensky, don't they? Oh, I think I've just written on my own face. They obviously own Zelensky. I've put my pen in now. It's all live, recorded live. It's like, you know, Zelensky is a puppet. He's a marionette, obviously. You know, he's on. He does as he's told. And if he went off. If he went off and was power crazed as well, there'd be a problem. You know, they'd need to get rid of Zelensky as well. So it's interesting. I want to know what it's all about. There's stories about it being about energy and oil and all that stuff. There's stories about it being about Persian gold. Apparently, these Western governments and these banking cartels are after the Persian gold that they've got, because they've actually got nothing to back all the money that they've been giving away. We know the money system is collapsing. And he's not playing ball on that. And apparently he's hidden the gold. So how can we know? We're told.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because this is the way it's always been, that when you take out a regime, they go and raid it for all of the resources. And one would hope that that the Trump administration isn't playing down that pathway just the same, because it's about freeing the people of Iran. So Israel has said that at least one ballistic missile launched by Iran on Thursday was carrying a cluster bomb warhead. Human rights groups have long campaigned for cluster bombs due be banned, as they pose a greater risk to civilians due to their indiscriminate nature. A 2008 convention banning their production, storage, sale and use has been signed by 112 countries, not including Israel and Iran. And the IDF said the warhead split up at an altitude of around 7 kilometres over central Israel, spreading around 20 smaller munitions over an 8-kilometre radius. One hit a home in the town of Azor and others remain unexploded. The IDF said sappers had found and disposed of 20 bombs, but warned others could still be unaccounted for. So that's an interesting story. Meanwhile, Australia has shuttered its embassy in Tehran and directed all Australian officials and their dependents to leave based on advice about the deteriorating security environment in Iran. We've also got another graphic here. I'll see if I can find it for you on airlines. Let's find it. No, of course,
Well, that's big news
right
if Australia's pulling their people out of Tehran.
This is right. And so certain aircrafts now are forbidden from entering American airlines and not flying into the Middle East at all. That was the next one. I'll play for you a quick clip from Miss Her Monotone, Penny Wong. She's decided to make some comments.
What I would say to Iran is it's time to come to the table. It's time to come to the table and commit. Like, there is a war going on in the Middle East. There's a war going on in Europe. I know that the Prime Minister is considering whether he should be. And why is that? Well, as I said, we have a war in the Middle East, war in Europe. This is the world is increasingly unstable, and this is a time where you have to lean in.
There you
Who's
go.
your boss, Penny Wong? Who's your boss? I don't think you work for Australia. What a very unlikable individual she is. So softly spoken and condescending, a woman absolutely secure in the power that she holds, Jason. Who's really her boss?
Well, Trevor Loudon certainly has something to say about that, and that whole thing with Box Hill and that special secret CCP-friendly meeting was something to be seen right there. And we're going to get that into a moment. This is the story I wanted to show to you. US Airlines has suspended flights to the Middle East. American Airlines suspending flights to Doha, Qatar, and the United Airlines has suspended its daily flight to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, as they continue to monitor developments in the Middle East. This is the story I wanted to get to from Rod Martin. I'm just going to find you the graphic to introduce it for you. So Rod Martin on X there, Rod D. Martin. I'll tell you what, that is definitely worth a follow. So what he's saying is Israel's war with Iran may have just torched China's $400 billion foothold in the Middle East. And he explains here's how Trump, Israel, and a crumbling regime just put a huge dent into the CCP's global strategy. So in 2021, China signed a $400 billion deal with Iran, 25 years of cheap oil, military, telecom, and financial access, infrastructure projects tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. They did a similar deal with Russia. And if someone's evil, China is right there. So because of sanctions, argues Martin, over 90% of Iran's oil exports go to China. So Beijing exploited that. They paid in yuan, not dollars, forced Iran to buy Chinese goods, took the oil below market price. They bartered debt for control. Even Iranian officials called it a colonial trap. What happens if sanctions end or Iran's regime falls? The oil for debt racket ends. The Belt and Road Initiative projects collapse, the $400 billion deal becomes toilet paper, and China loses its last major ally in the region. And that's what happens, and Beijing knows it. Iran was the CCP's regional anchor. Tehran arms Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all backed by Chinese tech and weapons. So now what happens now? Hamas and Hezbollah are already shattered, the Houthis are bleeding, and Iran itself may not survive. Xi's Middle East house of cards is failing. China needs Iranian oil. Without it, Chinese refineries must start paying market prices for the first time in years, which means higher energy costs, lower GDP, domestic unrest in China. Economic pain is real. It's coming fast. And one analyst put it best, argues Rod Martin, if Iran collapses, the $400 billion contract becomes a waste of paper. That's what happens when you bet on the world's top terror sponsor and lose. And maybe now they could help erase their trade surplus by buying US oil and liquid natural gas. That's an interesting take that many haven't thought of.
It's making more sense. So it seems to me now like the US, aided via Israel and the threats made on Israel, are trying to, if that strike was hit where it was supposed to hit, and they're pretty precise now, so I'm assuming they were, this could be the US trying to kick China out of Iran. Now you might think, oh, well, that's just a hypothesis. Well, wouldn't that make sense if suddenly enter stage left Penny Wong? this all has to stop with a nice, calm voice, because we really wouldn't want to damage China's interests in Iran, because we know Penny Wong doesn't give a flying fuck about any of the people on the ground in Iran. Apologies for which side? F-bomb.
You shouldn't say flying on TV, that's right.
Should never say flying on TV, I was told. So that is making more sense to me, right? That it's a broader issue, because Iran has been enriching uranium since 1992, I heard this morning, and nothing was done about that prior. And also Pakistan, who I consider to be a reasonably unstable state, doesn't have enriched uranium. They have fully operational nuclear weapons, and that's fine. That's allowed to stand. So that is a new interesting take for me, that this is to softly boot China out. And you always say that China's a pussy, that they talk a big game, but when push comes to shove, they've not got the goods.
Well, it does support it, doesn't it? It's really interesting, and this global chessboard. But so there is a new ranking, if you will. But if anything, it shows that no one knows what Trump is thinking. We've seen that with what we've presented today, and this is a deliberate tact to, if you don't know how he's thinking, then you can't plan, and this is why he does it what he does. Perhaps now what I might do is just read a couple of paragraphs from Amuse on X, another superstar on that platform. And it does bug me that so many people are anonymous, but this is just the new way that it works. He wrote a story called The Art of the Nuclear Deal. And he asks, why would a president long derided as a reckless isolationist now contemplate US military intervention in the Middle East's most volatile conflict? For those who have mistaken Donald Trump's strategic instincts for impulsive belligerence, the answer may surprise them. He is not preparing to start a war. He's attempting to end one, the slow, silent war over Iran's nuclear ambitions on terms favorable to the United States and ultimately to peace itself. So to understand what Trump is doing, one must understand what he values: results. The aim is not perpetual conflict, but lasting leverage. He has long demonstrated an aversion to endless wars, having resisted escalations in Syria and Afghanistan, pull out of the Obama-Iran nuclear deal in 2018, and brokered the Abraham Accords, a seismic shift in Middle Eastern diplomacy that eluded his predecessors for decades. His track record is that of a president who prefers peace but understands that peace is rarely won by appeasement. Now, with Iran reeling from devastating Israeli strikes and its nuclear infrastructure reduced to rubble, Trump is positioning the US not as an aggressor, but as the final arbiter. He's offering Tehran a choice: deal or doom. And to make that choice real, he is doing what the left-leaning press and even some of his MAGA supporters refuse to countenance. He's showing strength, real, credible, forced back strength. And then Amuse goes on to say that Iran's current situation is bleak and gives us a whole bunch of detail then. And he says military power is not an end. It is a means of forcing a decision. So there's a lot more in that article, and I ask people to go and check it out if you want to do it. And so it is such an interesting point when you realize what I keep saying, that we're not going to see nuclear war. It is posturing, but it is also using the exact amount of force to create decision, keeping everyone guessing and getting all the pundits and all the people coming out and getting it wrong, and cool heads will prevail. Now, having said that, to show you how serious it is, this is what's happened today. Trump's nuclear attack doomsday plane has arrived in Washington, and they call it the E-4B Night Watch, right? So the pathway has been shown. It's left Nebraska, and it's flown all the way out to the west and coming back through Texas, and it has now landed in D.C. So when you consider that that is put into play, he's telling you he's serious. But we also know exactly, we've just seen it exposed there, that this is part of the play. Trump's rhetoric for the average person says calling for Iran's unconditional surrender and hinting at US control over Iranian skies may sound like bluster, but to the trained eye, it is clear what he's doing. He's co-opting the expectations of the neoconservative and Israeli hawks who have long pushed for war. By standing beside them rhetorically, he magnifies the threat to Tehran, yet he remains fundamentally independent of them. He's not interested in a regional occupation, nor in endless entanglements. He is interested in Iran choosing survival over martyrdom. And that comes to that whole Wailing Wall scenario. Because if the people reject the Ayatollah in Iran and he goes and drops a big suicide bomb and takes something out, I think what that does is it destroys Islamic fundamentalism in the eyes of the planet. From that moment on, it is now a joke and a ridicule. But I just feel like if they're saying it's biblical, something crazy is going to happen. And if they take out infrastructure, it's certainly better than taking out people. If this is where we're headed, it just feels like something like that is brewing here. And I would assume, based on what I just said about this soul thing before, there is a way that these things can get thought out and planned, whether they're using special technology, whether these people are reincarnated, whether they are space aliens, who knows what's going on. You cannot come up with this particular story 7 years ago to the day and it not be something that we don't understand yet. That is my point.
I think we've been through a period in history where everything has been planned to occur very, very rapidly. And I think it's dizzying that we're moving on from one thing to another very, very quickly. And a lot of it feels like a crime scene cover-up to me. Mm-hmm. And the reason is, those of us who live in these Five Eyes nations, we have been attacked by a biological weapon. I would hazard a guess, or technological, to do with the EMFs. And I would hazard a guess that these attacks are continuing to go on. And here we are debating the honesty, validity, and credibility of governments to go into war or to make decisions about war and anything else moving forward. Penny Wong standing there smug as ever. Should we be listening to any governments that have attacked us about anything, Jason? That's my concern, because we clearly have been attacked. But it's the elephant in the room. You have your segment, the elephant in the room. It's the thing we're not allowed to talk about, and they don't want to go back and talk about it. And we saw in that clip from the Western Australia Parliament that even when it's brought up and they've provably changed, the recommendations, they don't want to talk about why it's now not safe for kids. So I'm just really, really concerned that this is deliberate, this moving forward with wars and conflicts and the World Health Organization. I mean, what's Trump got to say about that? If Trump really cares about the rest of the world, and we know he's not happy with Australia because he doesn't care about Anthony Albanese, probably because he knows Australia. I would say that, we've got American military bases in Australia, all around usually the north of Australia. And yet we seem heavily influenced by China. I feel like Australia is in a tug, right, between the US and China. Some kind of tug, and the China-friendly side of Australia is winning because they're the ones in power. And this is exactly what's happening in Iran, it looks like. A tug between American control or influence and Chinese control and influence. That's why Penny Wong's getting involved. It's very complicated, more complicated than we can ever know. But I'm just losing faith in the whole system, because not only should we not listen to governments who allowed this attack on us, and these ongoing conflicts and attacks, but why should we also be paying these people taxes? Who pays taxes and money to people who've harmed them? Anthony Albanese said he'd have a royal commission. He's put that in the toilet, so he lied about that. They lied about everything. People are always up on X saying, this is what Anthony Albanese promised, and this is everything that's turned out to be a lie, which is 100% of it. How does someone like Penny Wong or Anthony Albanese or any of them have the nerve to stand there in front of us and say, oh, well, we're very sorry for the people on the ground and we need to stop this conflict? You don't seem very sorry about the people in the ground in Australia who are still suffering from biological, technological attacks, mass migration, inflation, overtaxation that you're now calling levies because you don't want it to sound like more taxation. We don't have in our countries politicians working for the people of our countries. Our countries are being used as these corporations, as these businesses, making decisions that we know nothing about and don't agree with. And then when it comes to taxation, they're asking us for our money. By the way, we don't actually have to give it to a corporation, only a Commonwealth Revenue Fund. So something has to change, something huge. I'm looking at, someone hacked into Iranian TV and said, we're trying for regime change, raise up. As I said the other day, there are other countries that need regime change, let's just say.
Well, We all need change, don't we? We need maximum change. But this is
Major.
one of those scenarios that gets the world's attention, and there is a big changing of the guard. Someone wrote on, Michael wrote on a question to me on Substack, and he asked, and he was referring to my 51st state. He says, "Is this what you really think?" And someone else asked, "Yeah, well, tell us." So the premise when I came up with that idea was that, and I used to make it the introduction for the first 10 episodes, and I explained, if we have a king who is a globalist, who attends events for Islam, Muslim events, Ramadan, etc., makes greetings, and yet he's the head of the Church of England, and we live under the said Union Jack that he represents, but it also attends World Economic Forum meetings. And at the same time, we're part of this AUKUS agreement, which is designed to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to build nuclear submarines that we're going to park off the coast of China to spy on China. And yet China is our largest trading partner. How can we be a servant to three masters, a globalist king, the United States, and China? It doesn't make any sense. Where is our independence? And so I asked the question, if we can't be independent at that point and a servant to three masters, what if we used our situation here in Australia with our current constitution, was able to maintain the 1901 constitution, but at the same time be able to be protected by a United States Bill of Rights, some of which people say even the right to bear arms, including in that, but technically the right to free speech, and be protected by no tariffs, have an open visa arrangement with the US, and therefore be able to create all sorts of economic advantage for us. And that would include getting value for our resources on an American rate, as opposed to the rate in which we're sacrificing for cents on the dollar, selling away our uranium, our oil, our gas, our iron ore, etc. Makes no sense. And then we would be backed by a program that we could use nuclear energy for civilian methods, etc. And we have this incredible desert space. So that's what it's about. It's meant to create a discussion where we open our minds for once and think that we don't have to do what we always did, or tweed, that's what everyone else does. Let's think differently here. And if we are at a stage in our lives that we want to rebuild government in our own image, then maybe what we need to do is to look where our real strengths lie. After all, John Howard walked away from Paul Keating's idea of merging with Asia and China, etc., where he said that would be the next century. And he said, no, our real partner is America. But yet we do that. And then ScoMo kind of wants to do this weird double cross with Trump in the COVID era, and then come back and join the globalists. And he wanted to play both sides. ScoMo was a real slippery snake. So this is what we're talking about. It is an intellectual discussion, and generally what I try and do is talk about the challenges, but also talk about the solutions. Something that I learned very clearly that Jared Rennick likes to do is that he presents the problems, but he also shows you the solutions. And therefore, it's called People First, if to give a pitch for Rennick's party there. But that's the point. It's about putting us people first. Anyway, that's the idea for Michael and others that have asked me the question there. That's what I'm thinking about.
Even if Australians wanted to choose that route and become the 51st state of America, and every single particularly young Australian I've spoken to doesn't want that, and heavily despises the idea because they've been indoctrinated to hate Trump so much. But even let's say you had all Australians on board with that, and you could turn the voters around on it, you would still have the hurdle of getting rid of what I believe is the criminal cartel of the Labour Party. You know, there is evidence up the yin-yang of they literally buy people off, you know. They will buy a new pavilion for a cricket club if they use all of their people and all of their members and all of their events to push Labour. You know, you yourself said, you know, it's run like a cult. You know, there's the head of the snake, and the head of the snake makes all the decisions. Liberals are going the same way. I don't see, and the thing is, you talk about freedom of speech and right to bear arms and all that. Essentially, all that was in the original constitutions for Australia and hasn't gone anywhere. Because what's happened is Australia's constitution is here and it's been covered in this false paper, which just needs to be burnt off, which is this Unlawful Australia Act, because it would have required a referendum and there wasn't one. There are just so many hurdles. I feel like Australia, a little bit like Iran, is going to continue to be a battleground, obviously in a different way, in an economic way.
Mm.
The problem is with the Labour Party is that they, and I think the Liberals are going that way, is that they don't practice what they preach. So they're talking about socialism and sucking up to communists and let's do what's best for us and who donates most to the party. And, people get kickbacks and payoffs and there's money laundering and all that's going on. Australia has essentially become the Wild West, right? But what they're trying to sell to you is mass surveillance and minimum basic income and you can't fly and you can't have a car. Never mind Anthony Albanese and his girlfriend drive around in a V12, no less. I've never even owned a V12 for crying out loud. I'm on a 4-cylinder. They don't practice what they preach, but they're definitely in for what they can get. And as I said before, we've all got limited time on this planet. And these people, while preaching one thing, are out for themselves. So how on earth would we ever get rid of those greedy, corrupt people in Australia, Jason? The only way, excuse me very much, the only way would be to expose some of the other shenanigans that them and their fellow party members have been up to. But even when we discover that they've been up to terrible shenanigans involving children, it gets redacted because the public aren't allowed to know.
Well,
so it's like they are above the law. They can commit heinous crimes, even with children. Carry on because it wouldn't be good for Australians to lose faith in their leadership. But actually what we need is Australians to lose faith in their leadership because they keep believing the lies. They're spinning them.
Very, very true. All of the above. I don't know if it's going to be the children story, and not that I'm dismissing it in any way. It's just one of those stories that you really need to have all the evidence, the videos, etc., to be able to do it, and then they'll still be denied. I'm wondering if it's going to be on health, which it was a crime committed in real time, and we saw at the beginning of the show the WA jab story. This is Nick Holscher, who is an epidemiologist working with Dr. Peter McCullough. He's pointed out to 5 studies linking aluminium vaccine adjuvants to asthma, autism, and SIDS. I'm not going to read it out there because the you-know-whats are going to take you down and carry on like crazy, but I'll leave it there. Take a screenshot and read through it. I think that's really, really important information there that's worth considering. That there's a pathway there. What I wanted to show you then, going from that in this health situation, this is a quick clip from Fox News explaining what Bobby Kennedy is doing in the US in relation to health, in relation to making America healthy again. Take a look at what real action is happening right now.
Big food brands are making changes to their products as the Trump administration pushes to make America healthy again. So take a look. We start with General Mills. They're removing artificial food dyes from U.S. cereals and the foods that they send to our schools, K through 12 schools. That's going to happen by next summer. This is going to happen by the end of 2027. They're removing all artificial dyes completely by the end, like I said, it's 2027. They make Trick cereal, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Cheerios, Rice Chex, the things that are probably in your pantry. Also, Kraft and Heinz, they're saying goodbye to the artificial dyes by the end of 2027. Includes Jell-O, Capri Suns, Kool-Aid, and Crystal Light. Then the In-N-Out Burger, they removed artificial dyes from strawberry shakes and pink lemonade, and they replaced it with the beet juice and turmeric instead. Their focus is on the red 40 and the yellow 5. Also, the high fructose corn syrup, they're replacing that with natural sugar. Then let's take Steak and Shake. Instead, they're using the beef tallow fat. We've heard RFK Jr. talk a lot about this. Instead of the vegetable oils to make their French fries, their onion rings, and their chicken tenders. And the tallow fat, it's still unsaturated, but it is a lot healthier than the heavily processed seed oils. Then all the spices in your cabinets. McCormick, many of those in my cabinet are made by this brand. Working to remove artificial food dyes and sodiums. Their focus is on the red dye number 3, which has been linked to cancer concerns.
Okay, I'm going to say I feel so emotional about this now. God, I'm really ticked off. You cannot unrape someone, right? I realize they're trying to right the ship here. And they're making all the right sounds and all the right noises. Never mind all that crap still in Australian food. Our government don't give a stuff. You go up to any cereal box in your IGA or your Colesworth stores. Have a look at where it's made. It will say the Republic of Korea, or, it's weird. It's not even made in Australia. These needles that were put inside people, this is the attack. Look, for my mind, there are two Holocausts in world history. There's the Holocaust of the Second World War, and there's the Holocaust that we've just lived through from 2020 to 2025. But we're only allowed to talk about one of those Holocausts, because with this Holocaust, the second one, we're very much allowed and encouraged to be Holocaust deniers. We're not allowed to talk about it. And because they know they're that close to being found out, because they probably thought, because their egos are so massive, the hubris is off the charts, that they would get away with this and we'd think that they were really trying to stop us catching the flu. Because people were smarter than they thought, and we used their machine, the internet, against them, people have woken up. And now the evidence is there, and the data and the science that they told us to listen to is proving that they made a terrible mistake and harmed people, or it was deliberate. You wouldn't want people finding out that and then asking those people for taxes and to listen to you as a government. Why can't we talk about this Holocaust? You cannot unrape people. This is irreversible. Even Robert Malone, the inventor of mRNA technology, said you can never become unvaccinated. So you can take all the damn food dyes out of colors, out of foods you want. It's not going to make a difference, because for those people who've been harmed, you cannot make them healthy again, whether they're from America or anywhere else. And until we acknowledge, it's like any situation of abuse, until we acknowledge this Holocaust and the harm that's been done, and I want to know why. Was Fauci given a green light by the deep state to act with the World Health Organization and the likes of Bill Gates to do this to us? And for some reason, they're protecting Bill Gates because he's rich? Bloody seize his assets, pay off America's debt with that. Take that farmland. He doesn't deserve to own a Yellowstone. He's a killer, right? And he essentially owns Yellowstone, and he's not going to farm it, and he's not going to do anything good with it. He's just going to hoard it. He's just going to hoard it. Mine, it's precious, it's mine. You can't have it. You eat lab-grown meat. Who's going to address the second Holocaust? If you're asking us to acknowledge the first one, and by God, we have. I'm half German. Half of my family have lived with that guilt for long enough. What about this Holocaust? Who's behind that one? Make America healthy again. You can try. You can try, but there's a whole bunch of you that will never be healthy again, right? Because now you're immunocompromised. As we said yesterday, Jason, can you go a day in just Australia? I'm going to try. I'll try it today. Go a day without either being told by someone or overhearing a conversation with someone who's complaining about being immunocompromised. I used to hear conversations in Australia about people doing triathlons. I don't hear that anymore. No, I hear immunocompromised. This has been a Holocaust. They are all culpable. The Australian government, the Canadian government, the British government, the New Zealand government, and the US government. And I would have expected someone like Trump to stick up for us and come out and talk about it. But suddenly the crime scene cover-up is going on. Let's talk about dyes in food. And by the way, we're in conflicts on two ends of the world: Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Iran. Great. I feel for those people. I care for those people. And for my friends in Iran who've lost everything, I'll be doing fundraisers to try and get some money to them at some point when this is over. And I hope you'll support that just a little bit. They just need something. They lost their life savings to somebody who hacked them. We are asked constantly, Jason, to be empathetic to other people, and we are empathetic to other people. This is our problem. This is the weakness that AI has isolated in humanity, is our empathy and our humanity. But where's the empathy and humanity for us? We need it. We deserve it. We require it to keep paying you taxes.
Well, I appreciate what you said. I'm going to add to it by saying that those people that walk around telling you that they're immunocompromised are likely the same people that are buying the boxes of processed food off the shelves in the supermarkets. And when those people realise in conversation that certain additives have been removed, and it was interesting that one of those fast food places is removing high fructose corn syrup from their drinks and replacing it with sugar, something that all American drinks have this horrific high fructose corn syrup in them. When they realise at that point that the autism rate still exists, so then they can't argue that it's from the processed food, that they have to look deeper into it. And then we'll be able to get to where Nick Hulsh's message that we just saw earlier with the 5 causes according to aluminium adjuvants linked to those diseases. So as much as we want to flick a switch and get to an answer, I believe it's a process, and I think that the work is hard. I think we can't shy away from it. And I know that we're all exhausted and we want to have a miracle fix, but I think that this is the best possible period in our history that we've actually got a chance to even talk about it, as much as everyone else turns a blind eye. We saw what they did in the WA Parliament, where that person speaking on behalf of the health department just shoved an answer as quickly as they possibly could. We saw an answer of Chris Minns deflecting against the, how dare these upper house politicians even question the Labor Party premier, he of the world's skinniest shoulders, Chris Minns. Mate, you're going to have to get some bigger shoulders, man, because you're just not up for the job. And so I think it's just one of these examples of a game of inches that we have to fight on and on and on again in order to get to a process, to get to a conclusion, as much as that hurts. There's a couple of stories quickly that I'll put before I get to today's elephant in the room, and it's not a funny one, as you would expect for an elephant in the room. It's very, very serious. But in the meantime, I just want to put this up here. This is Trump again calling Jerome Powell of the US Fed too late, the Secretary of Treasury, costing our country hundreds of billions of dollars. He is truly one of the dumbest and most destructive people in government, and the Fed board is complicit. Europe has had 10 cuts. We've had none. He's talking about interest rates. We should be 2.5 points lower, 2.5% lower, and save billions on all of Biden's short-term debt. In other words, government debt, they're paying too much interest on it. We have low inflation. Too late, which is Jerome Powell, is an American disgrace. So you can look at that in isolation and go, oh, Trump's whinging, whatever. Here's today's headline from News. Swiss central bank cuts its interest rates to 0%. And it refers to while Aussies are still copping higher mortgage payments, one nation has cut its interest rates to 0. In Australia, our official rate's 4.25%. And interestingly, we got a rate cut last month on our mortgages by 0.25%. We waited a full month here at our place to get our letter to tell us that we were getting our interest rate cut. We found out they only cut it by 0.1. They kept 0.15 for themselves. And if that was that argument about bank profits, etc., they argued that that's what they needed. So they were more important than the battler who's been paying these extra high interest rates all this time. And so it's an interesting one from an economic standpoint, that this is what's going on here. So the American bureaucrats running the US Fed are literally playing games with the American people. So the uprising will eventually come when Americans realize that the people that are put in power, positions of power, are the ones that are destroying them, which supports your earlier argument in relation to the vaccine holocaust that we have suffered here in Australia and around the world by people that should be locked away and should never, ever see the light of day again. It's absolutely shocking. And if that's not enough, one more story for you. The Amazon staff are firing up after its CEO, Andy Jassy, has dropped that artificial intelligence bombshell that people will eventually lose their jobs to artificial intelligence. So it finally hits the surface. Will that be the story, Nicola, that gets people up in arms and demand change?
Well, I'm just disappointed that news.com.au is peddling conspiracy theories, because it was a conspiracy theory that artificial intelligence was going to take all our jobs. Yeah? But that wasn't true. That was crazy. You're a cooker. AI is there to help. It's there to do taxation and run the government more efficiently. No, it's not. It's an anti-human agenda, because then the corporations that run everything, because we're now in a public-private partnership that has about as much public as, a speck on the floor, it's not important. They want to save money to make more money, like you said with your banking, and they're keeping a little bit for themselves. My advice to you, and I will never do it again, not for a house, not for anything, don't borrow money from banks. You're getting into bed with demons, demonic people. I told the story months ago, that old story from years ago about the banker and his son. These banks believe they are hunting us. They know they are hunting us. They're stealing from us. They are using us. And then what happens at the end of it? the Labour government come along in Australia and cancel all your parchment paper title deeds and list you as a tenant on a digital lot number, that was worth it. That was worth going without takeout coffees or dinners out or weekends away with your wife, or that caravan purchase, so that you could go into a banking loan deal and give them every cent so they can go off and buy super yachts and islands and, 25 houses, mansions around the world. Don't borrow from banks. There's other things you can do. You can go to community organizations. You can go to capital loans companies. They're not banks, capital lenders, and they will lend you the money for a mortgage. They will sort out a deal for you that works. We need to stop doing business with these banks. Can you imagine? You don't need a military. You don't need a space laser. You don't need 5G, 6G, and 7G. You don't even need the world's best hacker. You just need all of humanity to say, I'm not borrowing from banks anymore. They will collapse like that.
And people power once again. Now, this is the elephant in the room clip that I wanted to bring up that I alluded to. It's confronting. It's Tucker Carlson talking with Sean Ryan, and they're talking about, I'll play it for you. But my point is that this is part of the reason why the establishment is poisonous, and you'll see why. Let me play it for you.
It's not just blackmail that makes people obey. It's not just bribery. It's also the threat of violence.
Do you know anybody that's been threatened with violence?
I think every U.S. president has been threatened with violence implicitly because of the murder of John F. Kennedy. I've known a bunch of presidents, and I think every one of them understands that, it's pretty obvious what happened there, or the outlines, maybe not the details. And no one has, to this day, released all the files. And why is that? Because the message is really clear. If you get too far outside the boundaries, you could wind up like JFK.
Who places the boundaries?
Probably the same forces that murdered the sitting president in 1963.
I wish you'd cut off that little TikTok thing. It annoys me so much. Yeah, we're all constantly threatened with violence. It's not just sitting presidents and prime ministers. It's interesting, isn't it? That clip I did on X has done really, really well from a few days ago. So I've left it there pinned at the top of my page, where I said, the Bilderbergs had their meeting last week, and one of their agenda points at the meeting was how to depopulate the planet. How do you think it would stand? How do you think it would be viewed legally, lawfully, if we all held a conference in the 99% to discuss how to depopulate the elites, Jason?
Indeed. And again, that is the point there. If every politician is somewhat implicitly told to stay within their lane by an invisible spy agency, and we could dig up the Chuck Schumer clip that said that if you go against the intelligence agencies, they've got 7 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Is this the reason why Trump was shot at? Is this the reason why they've tried to get him? Is this the reason why they used the lawfare? Is this the reason why he's standing up to what they're doing? The man holds all the cards, has all the power, and has called them out. And the deep state, as you said earlier, were controlling through the CIA, the Ayatollah of Iran, who has since gone rogue. Doesn't mean that that wasn't part of what was expected. North Korea went through the same process back in 2017, and they were calm. Trump went over and crossed over there and shook hands and met with Kim. We saw Russian Defense Minister Secretary Shoigu arrive in North Korea early in the week, which is pretty much letting Kim know that things are, just to stay in your lane. At the same time, Putin reached out to Trump and said, let me help you out with these negotiations, to which Trump said, how about you sort out your own business first? So that tells you the hierarchy of what's going on. Trump sits slightly above Putin, who sits above Xi, who sits above the rest of what's going on. Now, we can argue if we really want to, and I was going to save the clip, but I think we might as well play it. This is really interesting. This is Trump and Netanyahu
Can
meeting.
I just say before we go to the clip?
Yep.
Based on what you've just said, it is obvious then who the people are, who the threats worked on. So that's Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, Scott Morrison, Anthony Albanese, and Jacinda Ardern.
Yep.
So the threats worked on them because they're standing there cheesily saying, I ran my nation with kindness. Please buy my book.
Yep.
And there's been no threats on their lives. So they've behaved. That we know.
Absolutely. So the question people have is, and this is the one they keep saying, is Mossad pulling CIA strings? Is Israel controlling America? Well, you might have an opinion in the past. Take a look at this clip and have a read of what it says below.
Just so you understand.
Keep up.
Just so you understand, I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had to know the story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
Please, everybody out. Thank you.
Israel's being used just like the rest of us. That's what I believe.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Therefore, but Israel has had the power. It has had the influence, and we've seen that in the U.S. Congress. But something very different here. But they have worked with the spy agency, the CIA, to achieve said ends. But the only way that we ever advance is that we have to achieve peace on earth, and we have to somehow unite in other ways. But at the same time, there appears to be still a hierarchy. I talk about the age of Pisces and a hierarchy, in the age of Aquarius, no hierarchy, a horizontal dissemination of information. So I feel like with the events that are happening at the moment, we are leading to this arrival at the age of Aquarius. We're not quite there yet, but we are most certainly at the door, and the door is shut, and very soon it's going to open. I think that we are blessed that we are in this time, that we are alive to see it, and at the same time to be able to put together this complicated set of stories and discussion and analysis as we do each day for the people that consume it, that share it, that participate, and are now even choosing to financially support us. I don't know anyone else who's been able to do it from Australia the way that we're able to put this together, and we don't know all the answers. But I tell you what, I think that when we watch what is going on and uncover all of the information, I think we are seeing the greatest change, positive change in history. But unfortunately, life on Earth means that it comes with a risk and a price. And that means for us here in Australia, it still is, to an extent, the lucky country, because we are safer than anywhere else we could be in the planet at the moment with what is going on. If something was to explode here in Australia, we are furthest away than anyone, so that's a good thing. But it's not the end of it. And we are far from perfect, as we just talked about here, with our complicit politicians who are part of this globalist regime that is intent on somehow losing us, getting rid of us, depopulating us. And that has always feathered the thing that I've never understood is who are they answering to that convinces them that they need less human beings on Earth when it is proven that that is not the case. Climate change is the great ruse, convincing us that we're going to overheat and that the ice is going to melt and we're all going to drown. A complete furphy based on the fact of 432 parts per million carbon dioxide is a joke. Who has threatened us? Are there people that have created human beings?
Funds. There are people who hold the super funds and they don't want to pay them out. It's the money, it's the banks. It always has been.
It can't be just that, but it can't just be the money. They print it. The money grew on trees in COVID. So
it is about the money. Now, let me tell you what I think about superpowers and how they work. When you're looking at, because people have questions about America and Israel. Israel has a fantastic military. They still do national service. By the way, Yuval Harari is Israeli, and he begged out on his national service. He didn't do it because he said he has anxiety. It's funny because he seems real confident when he's up there telling us we're all hackable animals. Twat. Israel has the Iron Dome technology. Israel has some of the most high-spec military technology on Earth. So there's obviously an intellectual draw there when it comes to the military side of life on this planet. However, America is a gangster. It doesn't matter who's at the helm, who's in charge. who's feathering their own nest while they're there and how evil they are, the likes of Hillary Clinton, Obama, Biden, and Bush. America is the big cojones, the big daddy-o, right? So this is how I, as a layman, feel it works. In the sense that be in a meeting with Israel and their intelligence will talk to each other, the CIA, Mossad, whatever. It's so layered that even agreements people think they have with people do not stand. There's no honor among thieves, right? America has breached every treaty it's ever signed, and I don't expect things to change moving forward. We've reached the end of the show, Jason. We went a bit blobby there at the end. Do you want to say anything before we go?
Well, we are in full-blown winter here in Australia. That means it's time to rug up, relax, have that warm hot chocolate and think about the good things that are coming. Look, 2 weeks, who knows what's going to happen. We haven't even talked about the idea of what happens if there's a great big EMP and we lose comms for a week or two. We'll get a holiday at that point, as we'll be scratching around for to see what's going on. So I hope everyone has a great weekend, and thank you again for your support. I'll just quickly put up one more time. If you're this far into the show and you're thinking about it, we really do appreciate it. $60 instead of $75 to sign up to be part of the dailyaustralian.substack.com and be part of the independent news that's making a big deal. Thank you very much.
And I would advise that you go out and find your cheap candles at the $2 stores, just in case the lights go out, and we can all huddle and people will walk out into the streets perhaps and even talk to their neighbours. I think that would be a great idea. So thank you for watching the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and Jason Olbourne. Have an amazing weekend. We will do this all over again on Monday.